Hi, it's Mark from Top Local Lead Generation. We're here with Bernie Pawlik of Pawlik Automotive in Vancouver. They're 15-time winners of Best Auto Repair in Vancouver as voted by their customers. How you doing today, Bernie?
I'm good.
So we're going to talk about a Jeep Cherokee diesel repair. What concerns did you find with this Jeep?
What we found with this Jeep is it was brought to us with the check engine light on and a warning. I was trying to think now. The low power reduced warning lamp on the dash, and basically the engine had no power; it wouldn't go anywhere. Now there's a lot of things that can cause that on this Jeep, but what we found is that we scanned it. We found there was a trouble code for a swirl valve motor, and basically once this motor is inoperative, it puts the vehicle into a limp mode.
So I understand it was a vehicle that is equipped with the Mercedes 3-liter diesel. What's those things like?
Good. So the Mercedes 3-liter diesel is very common engine in quite a few different Mercedes models. The ML 350, the R 350. You'll find them in Sprinter vans, and also Jeep Grand Cherokees used them for a few model years as well when Chrysler and Jeep were in partnership together. It's a good engine, complex engine for sure, but a very good engine nonetheless.
So Mr. Swirly failed on this one. What's a swirl valve? Do swirl valve motors, that's a mouthful, all fail on all these kind of Mercedes diesels?
Well, they seem to fail more on Jeeps than the Mercedes. I mean, they will fail on all of them. So a little bit about a swirl valve. What is it? It's basically a valve inside the intake manifold, and what its function is to create turbulence in the air. So at lower engine speeds, turbulence in the air kind of swirl. It basically causes the air to swirl, as the name implies, and that improves the combustion process, gives the engine more power and reduced emissions. But as you get to higher engine speeds, you don't need that. These valves are basically a flap that sits in the intake manifold. It actually becomes more of a restriction. So the swirl valve motor opens and closes these valves at the critical time. Now the swirl valve motor on this engine, and I'll talk for a minute and I'll put a picture up. The swirl valve motor on this engine basically sits it's a V engine, so it sits in between the two cylinders in the valley area of the engine, underneath the turbocharger, and right below the air intake pipe. And this actually makes the motor a little bit vulnerable, as you'll see in a picture in a minute. So what we've got here, I'll just put a picture up. This is the failed swirl valve motor. It's very time consuming to remove it. You have to remove the turbocharger, the air intake pipes, and a number of other items to get at it. If you look at this motor, it looks pretty ugly. It's grungy, it's covered with oil. And this is the primary reason for this motor failing, especially on Jeeps. The air intake pipe, which I'll show you in the next slide, tends to develop a leak, and there's some oil that circulates through that air intake pipe. It's just a natural process with the engine, and the seal in the pipe tends to fail, and it'll cause oil to drip onto this swirl valve motor, eventually causing it to die at an early age. I mean, there was so much oil in this motor. When I took this picture, I put the motor on top of a white piece of paper. When you took it off, there was a little pool of oil underneath. So it's pretty messy. I mean, the motors will fail. It's a mechanical device. It's electrical. They will fail over time. But having oil pouring on top of it is probably the leading cause of failure. Now, this is the hose. They sometimes refer to as an elephant hose. This is a very commonly known failure problem on the Jeep. They do go bad on the Mercedes, but not nearly to the extent of the Jeep. I mean, the engine's the same, but the air intake system on the Jeep is a little different. And if you can see a little red seal. There's two hoses that clip together at that point, and that seal tends to weaken, and then oil will start leaking out of that area and dripping onto the swirl valve motor. So that's what causes the failure.
It sounds like this is a preventable problem.
Absolutely, and the key thing is to inspect that seal and that leak on a regular basis. So every service, which would be about 10,000-15,000 kilometers on this vehicle, is to basically have a good look at that, see if there's any oil dripping out of that hose, and inspect the integrity and quality of the hose. If it looks bad in any way, it's worth changing. I mean, it's a couple of $100 job to change the hose. The swirl valve motor job is well over $2,000 to do. So it's well worthwhile. This Jeep, by the way, had only about 67,000 kilometers. It was pretty, it was a 2008, but it was, still pretty low mileage.
So what's your overall impression of this engine?
That's a good engine. I mean, it's excellent and good power, nice and quiet. Great engine overall, but it is a very, like all modern diesel engines, it's very complex. There's a lot to it, and any little thing that goes wrong tends to put the vehicle in reduced power mode. So you can't just kind of run, limp along at a half-assed pace. It's like either it doesn't work or it works, and so that's sort of a frustrating part of this engine. But if anything goes wrong, you have to fix it. The turbochargers have some issues, but overall it's quite a reliable engine. But it's the kind of thing where you really need to keep on top of your maintenance, changing your fuel filters, your oil, inspecting things like these intake ducts to prevent any premature damage, because it certainly will cost you if you don't.
So we've been talking with Bernie Pawlik of Pawlik Automotive in Vancouver, their award-winning shop, 15 times voted best auto repair in Vancouver by their customers. If you need help with your diesel of any kind, give them a call, 604-327-7112, or check out their website. Tons of videos, articles on there about diesels of all kinds. PawlikAutomotive.com. Thanks, Bernie.
Thanks, Mark.